Hey there, my name is Amy. I'm the connection coordinator for our Poplar Hill site, and I'm also a serving member of the teaching team here at Vitalpoint Church. So we have been in this series called Discovering Jesus, and in this series, we have been unpacking Jesus's I am statements that we find in the Bible for us. Now, these I am statements that he makes are all metaphors to who Jesus is and what he came to do. And so far we've examined his statements, I am the bread of life, I am the light. And today we are looking at his statement when he says, I am the door. Now, I personally think, as I've been thinking about this series, that it would be really great if we could all start introducing ourselves using metaphors from now on. No, like in typical ways of describing who we are to people. Instead, we just use a metaphor and just let them draw their own conclusions about who we are based on that. Now, I've actually tried really hard to think of a good metaphor for connection coordinator, but I have yet to come across it. So I would love to hear your ideas, just because I think it would be a fun thing to kind of unpack and think about. But anyways, it's always fascinated me the way that Jesus never really comes right out and says who he is. He never just straightforward says, hey, I'm here. This is what I came to do. And yet slowly lets people discover and unpack who he is. That he is in fact the Son of God. He's the Messiah. He's the one that so many had been searching and praying would come to them. And here he was. But then I remember what Proverbs 25 verse 2 says. It says, it is the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings is to search things out. Now, I'm sure that there were many reasons why Jesus didn't start his public ministry just by, hey, here I am. I mean, he certainly would have been killed much earlier on in his ministry if he had done that. But there is something I think really incredible about the opportunity for an individual to discover and experience the truth. It's one thing to be told about something, but it's a whole nother thing to discover it and unpack it and explore what that means all for ourselves. I think that's kind of the difference, the searching and the seeking between a fan and a disciple of Jesus. Because we read that crowds came, they were enthralled with Jesus. They were so interested to hear the way that he spoke with all this authority, and also would sit in anticipation for him to perform these incredible signs and wonders. But there was a difference between those that came for entertainment and those that pushed through the crowd. Those that pushed through the crowd desiring to really know who this man was. And then there would just be a handful of people who were willing to actually lay everything down, all in order to follow him and to be with him and to know him. At the beginning of this series, our lead pastor, Ron, challenged us to not just simply learn about Jesus this summer in this series, but rather to be captured by his gaze. We have an opportunity to do more than just learn about who Jesus is, but actually give him access to our souls and as we uncover who he is and what he means to us and for us. Today, we're unpacking, like I said, what Jesus means when he says, I am the door. It's quite a bizarre way to describe yourself, like what color of a door, big door, small door. We're going to get to that. But let's read the passage where this statement comes from, all in John chapter 10, verses 7 to 10. So Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, but I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Now, there's a lot of actual metaphors and imagery going on here in this chapter of John, chapter 10. He actually makes two I am statements in this chapter very closely together, starting with that he is the door, and other translations will say that he is the gate. And then right after, he identifies that he is the shepherd. But in both of these illustrations, we are the sheep, whether you like that or not. Now, these two things are closely connected, but we're going to be looking and exploring at what Jesus means when he says, I am the shepherd next week. And I certainly don't want to step on lead pastor Ron's toes and steal his thunder on that one. So we're going to focus on the door. Now, I want you right now to think about the door of your home, assuming that it's the main entrance of your house, the front door. This door is the entry point to your home, right? You typically welcome people or deny people access to your home through the door. Very rarely or very unlikely, I have never come across someone welcoming me through their window. Now, when I was a kid, my sisters and we got off the bus before my parents were home from work, and we had this really bad habit. And to be honest, I think back and I'm just not exactly sure whether we lost the key or just forgot the key constantly. But my sister's window in the back was typically left unlocked. And when you could climb onto the railing on the deck to reach it, slide it open, hop in through the window, and then that person would then unlock the door for the rest of us at the front door. And so we really had this bad habit. To be honest, it's so long ago that it's hard to remember if just like this actually seemed easier for us to do than actually remembering the key or why we did that so often. But we did that until a neighbor noticed us, because this is not a typical way of entering the house, and just inquired of my parents why we were doing that. But anyways, Jesus describes himself as the door, this entry point. But what does this entry point give us access to? This text describes 3 things that are happening here when we enter the door. 1, we come in and we find salvation. 2, we go in and out. And then 3, we find pasture. So let's tackle that first one first. Anyone who enters by me, they will be saved. In the Old Testament, we actually find 2 events that foreshadow this idea of a door to salvation for us. Ultimately, that door would become Jesus. But the first one we can read about is the account of Noah, found in Genesis chapter 6 and 7. Now, some of us here may be familiar with this story. And to be honest, if we're really truly honest about this, it can be a really uncomfortable part of the Bible to read. It's hard to understand why something like this would happen. But in the time of Noah, the earth was filled at that time with people whose every thought and intention were only evil constantly. There was no good thing that they were doing or anything like that. The people were filled with such corruption and violence to the point that the Bible says that God actually regretted making mankind on earth. This is a level of evil in people that I don't think in our cultural context we can fully grasp what was happening here. However, it does say that Noah was different. It says that Noah walked with God. And because he walked with God, he found favor in the eyes of God. And so God shares his plans with Noah about this flood that he was bringing to put an end to all flesh because of the level of corruption that they were bringing into his creation that he made. And when he made, he said it was good. And so because Noah was different, God gave instructions to him to build a boat for him and his family to be saved. This boat had a very large door in order to accommodate all the wildlife that would be boarding with them. I mean, I won't even let my kids get a dog. I can't imagine maybe the excitement of this family that all these animals would be with them. But anyways, when they all entered the door, God closed it and he sealed it. And then all who entered into that boat, all who crossed that threshold, they were saved from the judgment of the floods. And all who did not, who were on the other side of that door, perished. The door to the boat was that gateway to safety from the flood, but also for Noah's family, safety and escape from the violence and evil corruption that was filling the earth. God had provided a way of salvation for Noah and his family as they made that decision to enter into that door in the boat. The next example we see of this door can be found in the second book of the Bible called Exodus. Now, through this series of events, God's people who are known as the Israelites found themselves as foreigners in Egypt and enforced into slave labor. Many, many years, people cried out, and God heard their voice of their desire to be free, and he sends this man Moses to make a petition for their freedom. And through God, he performs these signs, wonders, and miracles in the form of plagues to force the hand of Pharaoh, who was the king of Egypt, to let the enslaved people of Israel go. Now, something that is so fascinating, I just love about this account is how each of these plagues were not random. Because when you first read it, you're like, these seem random, but they were specifically chosen because they stood in the face of the gods that Egypt served, the false gods that they served. Each and every one exposed who God was, the true God, and the supremacy that he holds over anything and everything else. And so the final plague that's brought about is the firstborn of every family in Egypt was to die. God gave them instructions for this special meal that they were to prepare and have within their home. And then on the doorpost, they were to take the blood of the lamb that was slaughtered for this special meal and paint it over the doorpost. Now, anyone found inside these marked doorposts would be saved from death. So for all who obeyed, who were inside that marked door, they were saved. They were saved. And again, we see then that this doorpost was a gateway to salvation from death. Many today who are familiar with the Christian faith would be aware that Jesus is the only way. The only way to eternal life, the only way for us to live forever. Yes, this physical body will decay and it will experience death, but our spirit, our soul, that will have eternal life with Jesus when we acknowledge his lordship over our lives. And so we understand then that death, that burial, the resurrection, it paid the price for us to be able to achieve the righteousness, which is just a fancy word for saying we now have the ability to stand in a right relationship with God that we can never attain on our own. But I think too often we stop here. We stop here, and don't get me wrong, that is incredible news. Eternity is incredible news. When we're telling others about this, I think we can forget that not only is Jesus the door to our salvation for eternity, but it also means that on this side of earth, our soul can experience these eternal benefits when we belong to him. That this word saved that the disciple John is using here actually means so much more than just salvation from death. It also means to be healed and to be made whole. On this side of eternity, when we walk with Jesus and relationship with him, we get to enter into the presence of God continually because of Jesus. We have that opportunity to give him access to the depths of our soul, our pain, our brokenness, that light that we talked about last week. It exposes those things inside of us, and he helps bring true healing to us. This happens in our spiritual disciplines that we've talked about at the beginning of this year in our series, Practicing the Way. Those things of silence with God, reading the Bible, praying, spending time in community with those who we can trust the depths of our souls with, those who love the Lord and are walking that path with us. Recently, we've been talking about understanding and looking at the sin and the behaviors in our lives that we would love to get rid of, as, you know, they're not just outward behaviors to make us a better person, but rather they're symptoms of a sick soul. They're symptoms of our soul that needs to be made right. Through Jesus, there is hope for this healing. Through the gift of his presence, the gift of community, we can trust him with those broken parts and pieces of us that, to be honest, some of us do a really good job covering up sometimes. Now, the second thing that Jesus, the door, gives us access to is the going in and out. Now, when I read this and spent time in this passage, this statement really stuck out to me and caught my attention. So we go in and we receive salvation to eternal life and can experience the healing of our soul when we go in, but then we are to go in and out. It seems a little confusing, but this doesn't actually mean that we leave the salvation behind. The presence of God has the power, I believe, to change everything. I've seen it. I've been a part of it. I've experienced it for myself. Jesus gives us this opportunity of a door to go in, and there is nothing like being in the presence of God. Psalms 84:10 says this, "For a day in your courts is better than 1,000 elsewhere." One day is better than thousands anywhere else. Think about that for a second. Now, throughout my years and my faith journey, I've been really blessed to be in places and spaces where I could actually physically feel and experience the presence of God. I've even had like a couple dreams over my life where I've encountered just a very small glimpse of what I believe is his glory. And to be honest, it's so hard to describe. I could try, but it would certainly fall short because there is nothing that I have ever experienced in life, certainly, that has compared to it. These moments have deeply marked me in my faith. And without Jesus making that way for me, for all of us to enter into his presence, I wouldn't have those experiences. We wouldn't have these opportunities. Everything in me in those moments just wants to stay there, because it's so beautiful. It's so wonderful. I would often be the last to leave a room where we were sensing this visitation, so to speak, of the presence of God. Or I would be upset when I woke up from that dream, or in that time where I was in my living room on my couch, I've got a spot where I'd be praying or reading my Bible. I would sense his voice and his presence speaking to me. And I didn't want to get up from that couch. I didn't want to move from that spot and go about the day. But these experiences are not meant for us to stay in or to even chase after. I just want that experience over and over and over again. They're beautiful moments to have, but they're meant for us to go out. In the secret place with God, we are changed and transformed by his presence. We find our identity and our worth, who we really are, because we're sitting with the creator and the lover of our souls. In those spots, we are made whole. And from this secret place, we don't leave his presence behind, but rather we take it with us. We are empowered by it to go out and to do the work with whatever are put in our hands that day. McLaren says it like this in his commentary. He says, and only they who habitually live in this hidden and sunken life of solitary and secret communion will ever do much in the field of outward work. So this time spent with God, giving him access to our souls, allows us to carry his presence as we come and go, as we go about our daily tasks, and his presence blesses the work that we do, however mundane or unspiritual it may seem. Deuteronomy in the Old Testament uses this phrase going in and out to describe daily activities, and it describes all these regular activities of the day. And as a result of the Israelites' obedience, even the dull day-to-day things would be blessed and marked by God, saying, "Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out." Now, the flip side here is we can't get stuck in just being out. I have been so guilty of this, getting caught up in tasks. And when the pandemic hit, it was a painful season where my soul was exposed and I saw it for what it really truly was. I recognized and realized how much I was relying on my service to God, the things that I do for others, all of this stuff that I thought was so pleasing to him, and instead finding my fulfillment in those things instead of looking for finding my fulfillment in him. And so when all those tasks were stripped away, I realized a painful realization, because I loved the Lord, just how shallow my relationship with him was. That, yes, I had experienced these incredible moves of his presence and these beautiful moments, recognizing that he was in all of the things. He didn't want me to just seek him when I had goosebumps, and I get really big goosebumps. But he wanted me to seek him each and every day. I didn't have that solid habit of regularly, daily coming to him. I was so busy going out that I neglected to regularly come in and spend time in his presence. So I think that there needs to be a balance, right? Jesus is this door. We come in and we go out. And no, not every time I spend with God do I have this physical, tangible presence experience. In fact, quite rarely. I don't want you to be confused by that or think I'm some super spiritual person necessarily, but I know that this regular time with him, that despite how I feel that day, despite whether what I read in my Bible came alive to me, or whether I really sensed his presence in that silence and that prayer time, that whether or not I feel it, I am feeding my soul. Which brings us to this last statement that Jesus says in this I am idea, that he's the door. That using this door, we will find pasture. Now, for sheep, which I admittedly don't know a lot about sheep, but I've done some research, this pasture is a place that provides the primary source of food and nutrients. Now, I, like many of you, probably love a good meal. I especially love a meal that I do not have to cook. That is a blessing. I don't care if it's craft dinner. If I don't have to cook it, it tastes way better, always. But I love holiday meals, like at Christmas, those big meals with all the fixing. I love the variety. And typically you have a lot of leftovers. At least I like to cook with leftovers in mind. But during those holidays, I'm sure that you can identify with this. There kind of comes to a point where you've gone to all these events and you've been eating all this food and indulging in this rich food, that there's actually a point where you start to feel not so good, because your body needs to be refreshed and fueled by just regular plain food. Every day we are feeding our souls, whether we recognize it or not. The things that we listen to, the conversations that we have, engage with, or are a part of, the images that we watch. And now don't get me wrong, please do not misunderstand that this is not me saying, hey, you should only watch The Chosen, you should only read your Bible, and you should only listen to church music. That's not what I'm saying here, because what we engage in isn't even necessarily bad. But yes, there are some obvious things that is doing damage to our souls that we need to disengage with. Because it's like we're drinking poison and just assuming or hoping, oh, it's not going to do anything damaging to me. I'm okay. But these things that we consume every single day, they will not nourish our souls the way that Jesus does, through his word, through this silence, prayer with him, through community, through times of gathering together to worship and to sing about who he is and all he has done for us, through conversations about faith with others who love the Lord. Only through Jesus can we find that primary source of sustenance for our soul. Going to the source, just like eating, like going straight to the source, eating those fruits and vegetables. I know, okay, you roll your eyes. Really going to that source, that the basics of what we need to fuel our bodies. This is what our teaching team member, David, who's also our Exeter site leader, talked about a few weeks ago when we had the conversation about Jesus' statement, I am the bread of life. So if this door, Jesus, gives us all these benefits, what is preventing us from using it? What is preventing us from opening that door and stepping over that threshold, going in and out? I think of Jesus' statement that we examined a few weeks ago when he said, enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter it are many. So I was sitting and pondering this picture of the narrow gate, and in the context of our conversation, let's overlap these metaphors and call it a narrow door. I was thinking about this picture, and to my mind, it came someone standing at that door with someone else. It's a narrow door though, so they can't fit through with that person. I wonder if some of us today listening, maybe you're like, oh, I'm a part of a connect group, or I'm on a serving team, or I have a spouse who loves the Lord and I go with them to church, and that's great. But at the end of the day, you can't take them through that door with you. You can't bully someone to come through that door, and you yourself can't just hope and hold on thinking they'll get you through that door. No, that door is narrow because God is a personal God. He seeks your soul and wants you to know him, not want you to know him through someone else, just you. And I know that it can be scary. It can be scary for us to expose ourselves to be on our own and enter through that door on our own. Ron has mentioned, our lead pastor, a few times recently about this book called Soul Care by Rob Reimer, a few times. Now, I am just starting it, and I have to be honest with you. I'm nervous about it. I'm nervous about spending time in this book, nervous about the work that needs to happen, about what's going on in my soul and the parts that are going to need to be healed. I think of it like the messy basement that I have that I probably need to sort through, or my closet. My closet's so bad right now. It's going to get worse before it gets better, but I trust God. I have to trust him with those deep parts of me that even though it's going to be hard, it will be better, it will pay off. Now, I also picture someone today who's trying to get through that narrow door, but they're holding all this stuff. They're carrying so many things that won't allow them to go through because it just won't fit. I think about some of us clinging to the comforts that we have, like, well, you don't understand, I can't do life without this. I can't let this go. Or some that may be clinging to the idea of control. No, I can't accept a free gift. I have to earn it. I have to work for it. I need to know what the boundaries are. I need to be in control of this and control and I need all of these things in order to be in control because I'm the only person that I can trust. And I think that some of us are carrying baggage that looks like hurt, resentment, bitterness, things that Jesus is beckoning us today to lay down so that we can walk through that door and begin to allow him to heal all those parts of us and experience the liberty that he wants to give us of the going in and going out. Then I pictured someone with something in their hands that they're thinking it's not going to let me through the door. I'm not going to be able to fit it through the door. Like maybe something long and I don't know. I actually pictured a stick. I don't know why, but a stick. You're thinking, okay, I can't get through this door and I'm holding it the wrong way, to realize that I can if I hold it the right way. A few months ago, there was a young man who was a part of our recent Alpha group in Poplar Hill. And he came to a service at VPC for the first time. And we had this amazing conversation where he admitted to me, I don't know if I can believe this stuff. I don't know if I can fully put my trust in God. Because he was so tied to science and what science had to say. He's like, I love science. I love learning about this. And I don't understand how that fits. It doesn't fit to me. It doesn't make sense to me. And now thankfully, I actually have a dad that's a bit of a science nerd, but also a man of deep faith. And so he will tell me things that are way over the top of my head sometimes about science and how that's pointing to God and things in the Bible. And it's really encouraging, even though I cannot ever grasp what he's talking to me about. So I actually was able to encourage him that I think so many of us think science and God are opposed, but really they aren't. Really, so often science actually points us to the Creator, points us to God, and you can see his fingerprint all over those things. And what's really cool actually is a few weeks ago, I chatted with him after service, and this young man went from saying, I don't know if I can believe in God, to, wow, you could really feel the Spirit of God in the room today. That was incredible. And so one more, I pictured one last person that would be listening to this today, who felt so unworthy to walk through that door. Like maybe someone that has muddy shoes thinking that I can't go in. I can't possibly bring all this muck and mud, and I'll make a mess of things if I walk through the door. But you need to know today that Jesus never had the expectation of someone to have it all put together, that we had to have it all figured out. We had to clean up in order to approach him. In fact, what would the purpose be of his mission here on earth if we were to think that we could do it all on our own, that we could make ourselves right, that we could clean ourselves? All we got to do is pull up our bootstraps, scrub a little here and there. What would be the purpose of Jesus coming here on earth? So I encourage you, don't let that stop you. Step through that door. When I was little, one of my all-time favorite books was The Secret Garden. This was a story about a little girl named Mary Lennox, who was a very sickly girl with a bad temper and just generally miserable child. She was unloved by her family, and her whole family actually gets sick and passes away, leaving her orphaned. She's then adopted by a relative who is in his own deep, deep state of grief because of the passing of his wife 10 years earlier. He has this son that Mary discovers, her cousin, is shut away because shortly before his mother's death, he was born. And so his father couldn't even look at him, couldn't even be in his presence, couldn't see him because of the painful reminder this boy was of what he had lost. This boy then, on the other side, he was bedridden since birth, and it was believed that he would be a hunchback and die an early death. Now, I do acknowledge this really actually is a children's book, okay? And it seems like a bit of an intense story. I've actually passed the book along to my daughter, who also loves it, but it gets better, so hold on. So in this home that she's in this state of misery and hurt and brokenness, she hears of this garden that belonged to the wife who has passed away. This garden is locked up, again, because of that deep grief that the family was carrying. They couldn't bring themselves to go in it. Mary then becomes determined to find this key to get into the garden. And spoiler alert, because I know you're all going to want to read this book now, she finds the key, and her time in the garden completely transforms her. She becomes soft, she becomes kind, she becomes a happy child enjoying life, and she becomes able to open her heart up to those around her. And as a result, strikes up a couple friendships. One of the friendships that she sparks is with her ill cousin, who then she brings into the garden with her. And through the series of events through the book, as they explore together, they see that his health and happiness is restored, and recognizes that all this sickness, all these things that were keeping him in bed, keeping him from even just walking, well, a lot of them were in his head, and he found freedom. But it doesn't even end there. The father then comes back from the trip, and he's shocked to find that the children have been in the garden. And then he sees his son, it's been many years, and he sees him at full health. And this incredible moment happens where the relationship between the father and the son is restored, and they come together. Still, yes, there is grief, but there is hope then in the restoration of their relationship with one another. This garden changed everyone. In the movie adaptation, the father says this statement: "You brought us back to life, Mary, something I didn't think anyone could do." So when Jesus says, "I am the door," I imagine it like the door to the secret garden, the door that gave access to this garden that would be transformational for so many people, a place that was able to do what was thought impossible, a place where others were invited and beckoned to come to experience this transformation, this special place. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Jesus is the only door to true abundant life, the door by which we find salvation and healing for our souls, the door by which we go in and out, where our daily tasks are blessed and marked by his presence, no matter how important they seem. We find contentment in those things. The door by which we find the sustenance for our souls, where our souls are fed and nourished. Jesus freely gives us access to these eternal things, where true contentment is found, and no other thing in this world can offer us what he has to offer. And so will we accept this opportunity that Jesus is giving us access to true life, to healing for our soul, contentment and peace, inviting others, hey, come and experience this as well? Or will we let whatever is standing in our way stop us from entering in through that door? This door is freely open for us today. It's open for us every single day to walk into, but we have to make that choice. We have to be that one to step in and trust him with everything, recognizing that anything else that we pursue to live life to its fullest or whatever it may be will never live up to what we can have in Jesus or the way that he brings everything to our souls, everything around us to life. He brings our souls to life. He brings the things that we do, the people around us, the circumstances around us. We find life no matter what. Every other door that life has to offer us, it will only steal, kill, and destroy our souls. But Jesus comes to offer us the opportunity that by him and by him alone, we may have life, an abundant life at that. So the question I have for you today is, will you choose to enter into this door today?